The night was silent, yet heavy, the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but suffocating. The air, thick with despair, carried the weight of broken dreams and abandoned hopes. Somewhere in the distance, a single streetlight flickered, as if fighting its own battle against the darkness. And there, standing at the edge of it all, were they, tired, beaten, and ready to quit. They had come so far, endured so much, and yet, in this very moment, their spirits were shattered. They believed they had suffered enough, that they had nothing left to give. But what they didn't know was that their real suffering had only just begun, the descent into darkness. It all started with ambition, a fire that once burned so bright inside of them. They were filled with dreams so big that even the universe felt small in comparison. They spoke of success, of wealth, of making an impact. They swore that nothing could break them. But life had a way of testing those who dare to dream. The first wave of struggles came like a storm. Sleepless nights turned into endless exhaustion. Every effort felt like throwing punches into the void. No response, no reward, just pain. Opportunities slipped through their fingers like sand. And no matter how tightly they held on, they were always left empty-handed. People started doubting them, whispering, mocking. Family and friends who once believed in them now questioned their sanity. Maybe it's time to give up. Not everyone is meant to make it. Why suffer when you could just quit? The words were poison, seeping into their minds, eroding their confidence. And so they broke. The illusion of escape. They told themselves they had done enough. That quitting wasn't weakness. It was survival. So they walked away from the late nights, from the failures, from the suffocating pressure of trying to prove themselves. They chose comfort over struggle, relief over resilience. At first, it felt freeing. The weight on their shoulders seemed to ease. They convinced themselves that they had made the right decision. But then, something happened. A darkness began to creep in. Not the kind you see, but the kind you feel. It started as a whisper in the back of their minds, a gnawing regret that refused to fade, a voice that reminded them of what they had abandoned, of the fire they had let die. They tried to silence it, to drown it in distractions. But nothing worked, because here's the truth. The pain of regret is far worse than the pain of struggle. The real suffering begins. Days passed, then weeks, then months. They watched as others kept pushing forward. Some who had started later than them were now ahead. Some who had struggled alongside them had refused to quit. And now, they were rising. Success wasn't just for the talented. It was for those who endured. And suddenly, the weight of their decision became unbearable. Because now, they weren't just battling failure. They were battling themselves. The voices grew louder, the regret heavier. And as they looked into the mirror, they didn't see a survivor. They saw a coward, someone who had walked away, not because they couldn't do it, but because they had chosen not to. This was their true suffering, not the exhaustion, not the struggle, but the unbearable knowledge that they had betrayed themselves. And so, standing at the crossroads of fate, they faced a choice. Would they stay shackled by their regret, or would they rise one more time and fight for what was theirs? Because quitting may feel like the end of suffering, but in truth, it's just the beginning. The weight of regret. Regret is a strange thing. It doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in slowly, like a shadow stretching across the floor as the sun sets. At first, they ignored it, convinced themselves that they had made the right choice. But then, the silence became unbearable. Every dream they had once chased still lingered in their mind, mocking them. Every vision of success, every ounce of potential they had abandoned, it all haunted them. They saw people moving forward, pushing through their struggles, breaking free from the chains that once held them down. And them, they were stuck, frozen in time, drowning in the pain of what could have been. The pain of discipline is temporary. The pain of regret, it lasts forever. And so, one night, staring at their own reflection, empty, lost, unrecognizable, they made a decision. They would return, not because they felt ready, not because they had a perfect plan, but because they finally understood the truth. Suffering is inevitable. The only choice is whether you suffer for failure or suffer for success. The battle against themselves. The first step back was the hardest. Self-doubt clung to them like chains, whispering, "What if you fail again? What if you don't have what it takes? What if it's too late?" But here's the thing about doubt. It only has power if you listen. So they silenced it, one step at a time. They picked up the pieces. They embraced the grind. They knew that starting over meant enduring twice the pain, twice the struggle, twice the resistance. But this time, they weren't just fighting for success. They were fighting for themselves, for the version of them that had once believed, for the dream that still lived inside of them, buried beneath fear and hesitation. They pushed harder than ever before. Every failure, a lesson. Every setback, a test. Every moment of exhaustion, proof that they were still in the game. And then something changed. They no longer feared the struggle. They welcomed it because they realized the pain wasn't their enemy. It was their weapon, the rise from the ashes. Weeks turned into months. The same people who once doubted them started watching in silence. The same voices that told them to quit were now whispering something else. How are they still standing? I thought they gave up. But they didn't need validation. They didn't need approval, because they had already won the hardest battle, the one against themselves. And then the moment came, not an explosion of success, not overnight glory, but a shift, a breakthrough. The work started paying off. The results, slow at first, began to compound. The dream that once felt impossible was no longer out of reach, because they refused to quit, because they embraced the suffering, because they understood something most people never do. Success doesn't come to those who want it. It comes to those who refuse to surrender. The final lesson. They had walked through the fire. They had endured the pain. They had faced the demons of regret and conquered them. And now they stood stronger, unbreakable, a force that no failure, no setback, no moment of doubt could ever defeat again, because they finally understood the moment you want to quit the most is the moment your real test begins. And those who endure, they don't just survive. They rise,